Hi, everybody. Good morning, and welcome to our panel on what policy and regulatory changes are needed to fully integrate connected and smart technologies into energy efficiency strategies. My name is Natasha Vivangos. I'm the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Alliance to Save Energy, and we have a really great conversation today. Thanks for tuning in. So to begin, energy efficiency is entering the digital age. We're seeing innovation in IT platforms and solutions, greater connectivity, more efficient and connected smart devices, and also the scale up of distributed energy resources. And taken all together, this gives us an unprecedented possibility to have control over demand. It makes demand more flexible. So we can think about not only how much energy we're using, but when and where. And it really is hard to overstate how impactful this can be. It's really quite the paradigm shift. And it comes with a lot of opportunities. Greater utilization of demand flexibility and efficiency overall is a really powerful lever to drive decarbonization. It has the potential to reduce costs for consumers without sacrificing quality of life. And in fact, it very often can provide service benefits that enhance quality of life overall. If we take full advantage of this full suite of the energy efficiency opportunity, so including the traditional elements like weatherization and efficient appliances, but also into the more digital ones like aggregated demand response and vehicle-to-grid integration with electric vehicles, all of a sudden we have a really incredible toolkit that can provide benefits for customers and for the grid as a whole. So this really raises the level of where we can look for energy and emission savings and how we think about our energy system altogether. So it creates new channels, which are previously untapped for savings. So we call this full scope of opportunities active efficiency. And I'll just flag that the Alliance is leading an initiative called the Active Efficiency Collaborative. It is a community of industry leaders, NGOs, and public sector institutions working to accelerate the adoption of active efficiency and to ensure that it's done right. Many of our panelists today are participants and leaders within the collaborative. And if this is a topic that interests you, definitely get in touch and join us. So for today's topic, how do we take full advantage of active efficiency? This panel is focusing on the policy and the regulatory changes that can support a scale up of markets for active efficiency. And it's a really exciting area of experimentation, but it's in no way simple. Active efficiency isn't just one technology or even just one suite of technologies, but really a more holistic view of how we fit these technologies and practices together. And this does add complexity. It requires the involvement of a broader group of stakeholders. It requires thinking outside of traditional silos. And I mean every kind of silo. Silo from thinking about energy use as being in transportation, buildings, industry. A lot of that starts to blur, but also how we run efficiency programs, how we administer efficiency budgets. All of a sudden, you're getting to a much higher level of questions. So how can we take this sort of utility and energy efficiency policy and regulatory environment, one that's already diverse, geographically specific, fragmented, and complicated, and provide clear market signals that can advance active efficiency? And how can we approach policymaking in a more holistic way and provide both the right market drivers and the necessary flexibility to ensure that the system will continue innovating and continue growing? And generally, how should policymakers and regulators approach their next steps? Where do we start? And what are the lessons that we can learn from first movers? So these are some of the questions that we'll be tackling today, and we have an excellent panel with a variety of viewpoints. The speakers' full bios are available in the speakers section of the platform. And also, please do feel free to input questions for the speakers into the chat box, and we'll try to get to some of those towards the end of the session. So I'm going to go ahead and start with Andrew McAllister, who serves as a commissioner on the California Energy Commission, where he leads the policy areas of energy efficiency and energy assessment. So, Andrew, California is doing a lot in laying out new policy and regulatory approaches to advance active efficiency, and that's especially true in the area of demand flexibility. What's driving the interest in this area for you, and what steps are you taking?
Well, Natasha, thanks a lot. It's really an honor to be on this panel, and I have to just give kudos to the Alliance for spearheading kind of a redefinition of how we think about energy efficiency, to include all the things that you that you rattled off there. There's a lot of aspects of that add on and complement to how we traditionally have thought about energy efficiency that really do modernize it and bring it into the digital age and really enable it with all sorts of additional functionalities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about California's work on this front. So, the rubber's really hitting the road. As you said, it's all about DERs. The distribution grid is really surging in importance. Obviously, the wholesale market, bulk markets, and transmission, and all of those larger aggregated scales continue to be important. But our planning now has to be fully integrated from the, large scale generation and transmission all the way down even to the individual device. And those things are now, it's possible for all those levels to be communicating seamlessly with one another and resources to be harnessed and aggregated at some scale. We're looking at over the next couple of decades, we're looking at a doubling potentially of electric load with transportation and buildings being increasingly electrified. And that's also, that has a big impact on peak load. And so the idea of active efficiency and load flexibility is to not have that peak load double along with the energy consumption, right? So that we have improved capacity factors, improved load factors, so that we can optimize the existing investment and really influence and optimize our new additional investment and minimize that to the extent we can without sacrificing reliability, obviously. FERC is looking at this. They did an electrification workshop the other day. Very interesting. The balancing authorities, as they implement FERC's Order 2222, this issue is really just undeniably coming to the fore in terms of how we manage our distributed energy resources. So I just want to list, actually, I have a list of 7 things. I'll go really quick, just to illustrate and manifest the fact that we are looking at aggregatable load side or demand side and distributed level resources, flexible resources as a positive influence potentially on the grid. And, challenge and opportunity come in a package. And so it's both, I think there are 3 things we have to do as we navigate into this new disaggregated future, this new distributed future. It's reliability in California, certainly, and in Texas and everywhere else. That's job 1. And then decarbonization, as you said, it can enable pathways to decarbonize our buildings and our broad energy systems as a whole. And then cost management, cost reduction. Those are the 3 kind of pillars that we're talking about that load flexibility has to play in, or active efficiency has to play in. And we have to do all that with equity, right? We have to make sure that across our societies, everyone has access to these new technologies and has access to the grid at reasonable cost. So I'll just list off quickly and we can get into the Q&A, but load management standards is a really interesting thing we're doing in California that basically puts a web-based app with an API that is going to really reduce transaction costs across the board. So it revolves around a thing called MIDAS, that's the Market Informed Demand Automation System, which is a cloud-based resource that will push and pull information and sort of a prices to devices, if you will. But other signals could be pushed to devices as well, carbon content, congestion pricing, that kind of thing. So that's a huge innovation in terms of how we level the playing field and reduce its costs. SB 49, we have new authority to, Senate Bill 49, new authority to essentially regulate demand flexibility into our appliances. So that's a statutory authority that we have that has no federal preemption issues, which is very exciting. So we're developing that now. So talking about white goods that will have to have some grid interaction and flexibility. The building code itself is incorporating some of these as compliance mechanisms. So if you have load flexibility built into your new building, then you get some compliance credit. So we're tilting the playing field that way. We've just funded $16 million of research on load flexibility, the California Flex Hub. And so LBNL, the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, is the lead on that. We've worked with them for a couple decades on demand response. And now we're sort of pulling them into this active efficiency realm, and we're going to do some great research. Demand response in general, California is revisiting that, and it gives us a great opportunity to kind of integrate all of these ideas and create demand response programs that reflect all these new potentials. So we're working with the independent system operator and the PUC on that. Very exciting. SB 100, our 100% carbon-free mandate by 2045 for our whole electric system. we've shown with analysis that load flexibility can reduce costs and get us to our goal sooner. And so less build out means lower rates and a better performing system. And then finally, the Assembly Bill 3232 is a report that we're writing for the California legislature to chart a path for how we will get to drastically reduced carbon footprint of our building stock. And so load flexibility will play a role in that. And so we've been doing a bunch of analysis on that as well, and that'll continue to deepen. So that whole suite really in sum is just to line the playing field so that load flexibility can have a value, customers can see it, that innovators, like you'll hear from the rest of the panel, can really interface with resources that are common pool, that have a public benefit aspect that we as the state can help develop and push. We're not going to be the cutting edge technology, it's the state, but having resources that people can rely on, they know are there, that reduce their costs is the idea, and sort of create a coherent policy environment around load flexibility. So that's the kind of idea we have in California. We're working with all the market players to enable that, and listening hard to what they're developing so that we don't get in the way, for sure. And we certainly want to facilitate this. So back to the panel, and looking forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Great to hear all of those details, with California very much on the forefront of this space. Our next speaker is Tanuj Diora. Tanuj is the Vice President for Market Innovation at Uplight, where he spearheads Uplight's market development initiatives as part of the company's Step Change Labs. Tanuj, you've seen many angles of the sector from across your career, and Uplight is doing a lot of really interesting work in trying to connect the dots to make active efficiency really work for consumers while driving down emissions. As regards the policy regulatory space, where do you see the main challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, thanks, Natasha. Good morning, everybody. It's great to get to participate in this panel. Looking forward to not too much longer before we can all do it in person and have some debates afterwards over a beverage of choice. First off, I want to say, what Commissioner McAllister laid out is really exciting stuff, and there are a lot of great activities that are happening across the ecosystem. But I want to take a step back and think a little philosophically. I came into the industry on the supply side, and I jokingly tell folks I came into the supply side because I didn't understand customers at all. And I wanted to go into my economics 101 and think about this in terms of supply and demand curves and commodity markets, and I understand that. And then the thing about electricity was the demand curve wasn't even relevant, right? Back when I got in the industry 20 years ago, it was just the supply stack. That's where you made your money. You didn't make your money on demand. You made your money in the supply stack. And so clearly that has changed a lot due to technology, as Commissioner McAllister had mentioned. And now there's a massive opportunity for us to think about, so much of price formation occurs because of supply side technologies. Now we have the ability to use demand flexibility to get to an ultimate vision. If we're talking about 10, 20, 30, 40, 50% of resource adequacy being supplied by demand side, you can just imagine what that means in terms of how many dollars can be kept with consumers or kept on the customer side of the meter. And at the same time, we want to be thinking about, we have a system in place that wasn't designed for that. That system was designed from a supply side perspective. And a lot of things that are happening or thinking about the existing system, even exciting things like FERC Order 2222, are about how do we take the existing system and make some accommodations for new supply to come in. And because the expertise we have tends to sit either on the supply side, very separate from demand side, we also have a bunch of infrastructure that folks on the supply side don't understand. I know I'm still learning all the time about how we look at demand flexibility today, how we think about energy efficiency, demand side management, demand response, how we value it, how we deploy it from a behind the meter programmatic perspective. And a lot of the challenges that I see is stems from a fundamental incompatibility of those two approaches. And so, we look at, what does it actually take to get a program approved? At Uplight, we're a software as a services company investing in consumer engagement, empowering consumers. Jigar mentioned that at the top of the conference about the need to empower consumers. That's what we're focused on, is making that happen, but not just empowering consumers for their own benefit, but empowering consumers to optimize across the meter. So both for individual consumer benefit and system benefit, and then participation up. And so when we think about this complexity of, you got the supply side stuff that's going on, lots of great stuff happening across the country, but you still have an existing set of rules and regulations that were optimized when demand management or demand side management was a niche as opposed to demand side management being a real resource, that's where we start getting some challenges. We also have a lack of acceptance or understanding the need to reset the system for now optimizing for carbon, now optimizing for consumer empowerment, consumer engagement. Definitely bought into the four things that Commissioner McAllister mentioned in terms of reliability and decarb first. In fact, I think on my Twitter profile, I've pinned that as like reliability and decarb are the first two things we need to optimize today, but we got to keep in mind cost and equity as two guiding criteria as well. And so absolutely bought into all of that, but we just see a lot of complexity, a lot of weight in the current processes to actually deploy. So when I'm trying to deploy a solution, instead of thinking about all these things in terms of what's the best solution to capture all the fundamental value, our product folks are doing that. That's where they start from. But now I've got to start thinking about every single utility that I want to go deploy with. What is that utility's goal? Plus, what are the specific rules around things like persistence and uplift and free ridership and measure life and all sorts of things that are very unique place to place to place to place. And as each commission is thinking about the exciting new things they want to do at the big picture, there's a lack of those other things keeping up pace with these new visions. And so, when I look at California, I used to joke, or maybe not so joke, for the first couple of years in this current job, I didn't even mess with, I didn't send any of my team to California. It's like, let the California commercial team figure it out, navigate, they'll do their precise things. But California is way too complicated for me to send somebody in on a part-time basis to try to figure out how to participate in those processes. It's just too complicated. I think recently with some of the new developments that Commissioner McAllister's mentioned, we're starting to realize, there might be an opportunity for us to engage and participate in a more robust way. And seeing some of the utilities do some things and have to respond to the resource crisis from last August, we're seeing, that being taken more seriously. But there's still a bit of a delay in thinking about, okay, who has to come together? Is it going to be third parties? Is it going to be utilities? Really, why not both? Why not everyone? And that gets us into kind of the three challenges that I see in particular. One is around incentives. We don't have an alignment of incentives. We have some proven methods in a few states using the three-legged stool to provide a real clear incentive for utilities to invest in efficiency, demand side management, demand response, all of that together. But we haven't seen that be adopted everywhere in the country at the pace we need. Number two, we've got the silos. Natasha, you mentioned the need to de-siloize or to bust through some silos. The real application, just like, we don't separately procure natural gas-fired power plants and separately procure coal-fired power plants, well, not that anymore, or separately procure wind and solar and just plan for them individually. We actually run an integrated resource plan and integrate everything together. We need to start thinking about program design in that same kind of integrated way. And a key example is I can deploy a smart thermostat to provide a bunch of value, but I can get a lot more value if I deploy a smart thermostat plus a bit of weatherization of the home to create a thermal battery. And if I'm not thinking about deploying those together, I'm getting, 1 + 1 is not equal 3 in this case. 1 + 1 can equal 1.5 in some of those cases. So we got to think about silo busting. And then finally, we need to really lean in on consumer engagement and what the consumer experience is. If we're going to optimize across the meter, we have to empower customers. And even though the industry has been built for 100 years on not thinking about the customer other than ratepayers or meters, the simple change in rhetoric to talking about customers and not talking about meters or not talking about ratepayers, that simple is not a sufficient change. We got to get everyone in the policy world to think about how we're empowering customers and what that means in terms of performance of all the market players.
Thank you so much, Tanuj. And that's actually a wonderful transition over to our next speaker. So Curtis, our next speaker is Curtis Wynn. Curtis is the president and CEO of Roanoke Electric Cooperative and affiliate organizations. And I will highlight that Roanoke Electric recently began steps to embrace the rapid pace of industry transformation with projects including establishing broadband connectivity through its service territory, installing smart grid technology, deploying distributed energy resources, and integrating demand response capabilities into its system operations. So, Curtis, you're really advancing active efficiency in a community that does include a high number of low and moderate income consumers. In talking about any kind of an energy transition, there's a greater awareness today that new solutions can't exacerbate those inequities. And every speaker today does mention it, and I suspect every speaker will continue to today. And frankly, we really also need solutions to address those inequities from the top. So how has Roanoke approached this challenge, and how do you see efficiency, both the traditional and the digitalized element, playing a role in your efforts?
Well, thanks, Natasha. It's great to join my fellow panelists here. I guess I could start out by, as we talk about the consumer and some of the things we've been doing, I guess we've been involved in active efficiency and didn't know it. So I learned a new term over the last 7 days, to be completely transparent about this. And it's really, it hits the mark in many places with what we're doing. You did mention some about our region, our service area, and the demographics that come with that. And I guess to sum it up is that we are, as we look at this from a consumer perspective, having us talk about it really brings us from the bottom up, because we're serving a low and moderate income, mostly low and moderate income demographic up in the northeastern part of the state of North Carolina. So when we talk about this subject, I think about something that's very common to all of us, and it really deals with the old adage, or the old common thought about the digital divide, and the plain old telephone service for those who had it and didn't have it, the party lines where you could hear your neighbors talk about you. Ultimately, we got to internet service, and we had, back in those days, we had haves and have-nots. Now we are very concerned with the upcoming, what I call the upcoming digital or energy divide. And that energy divide is involving efficient housing for those who have that and have not, who don't have it. Behind the meters, we've heard already mentioned, behind the meter smart energy savings devices, participating in demand response activities with and in conjunction with the utilities, electric vehicle utilization. So you have the haves and have-nots in this energy divide as well. So how does that relate to active efficiency? To me, it perfectly describes the need for it, first of all. And you have problems, and then there are solutions. The problems are that the have-nots are causing this inefficiency at two different levels. One level is at the consumer level, where they are via substandard, inefficient housing, absolutely no access to or ability to gain access to these smart energy savings devices that I mentioned, and then being totally left out of the more efficient electric vehicle market, and then implementing things like solar and battery are pretty much out of the picture when it comes to the low and moderate income consumer. But at the same time, at the utility level, as contributors of these higher spikes in capacity demands, those folks who are left out of it are the largest and most significant contributors to utility inefficiency, from my perspective. They're, in many cases, adding significantly to the wholesale generation and transmission costs on the demand side. And then at the utility level, there's another problem, I think, that is going to have to be corrected. And that is the general acceptance of maintaining and being satisfied with a 50% or around that number capacity factor, load factor. I think with the technologies that are coming aboard and the things that are happening, as you so well described, Natasha, in your introduction, we should be looking much higher than the 50%, at something much higher than that as a norm. And that's something we're doing at our cooperative. Well, if you look at solutions to those problems, one involves removing certain barriers that are causing this inefficiency. The largest contributor to non-existence or non-participation is cost, and the ability to make those investments at the consumer level. When we know that there's benefits for both the consumer and the utility if those barriers are removed. So what we've introduced is something that we call it's an inclusive behind the meter utility efficiency investment program, and it's called using the pay as you save model. And it basically entails the utility making those investments on behalf of the consumer. I guess you could say taking the same approach with behind the meter technology and advancements and efficiency measures as you look at investing in a transformer, a pole, or a wire. And the target in most cases are those who cannot afford to make those investments on their own. And what we're seeing right now is that making those investments is not only bringing a solution to the consumer, but it's also bringing cost savings to the utility by way of lower demand costs and better and more efficient operations. So if you take energy efficiency as the baseline, we're now looking at ways that we can broaden this pay-as-you-save model and look at other investments beyond energy efficiency to other utility transformation areas such as smart energy savings devices, smart thermostats, smart water heater controls, in-home electric vehicle charging infrastructure in a manner that allows the utility to work with the consumer collaboratively to manage the times of use and ultimately more efficiently utilize the capacity that we're required to secure to run our businesses. So time of use management is very important in all of this, as well as having the technology and the infrastructure. So finally, I want to get to what I believe is the true policy area that we have to focus on. We have to recognize that in this energy transformation, where there's no longer this one-way flow of energy, the generation being in one place and the transmission going in one direction, now with distributed energy resources, we cannot make this happen without robust communications that's available to every home and every person on the utility system to become totally effective. So for starters, I think our policy discussion must be centered in some way or another around broadband capabilities, particularly rural broadband. Because, if you look at these lost opportunities that are due to the absence of broadband in the utility sector, if you really wanted to go broader with this, I think you see some of the same issues in education as well as healthcare. So you start looking at how we can pancake from a policy perspective all of these needs to the entire community. I think we really are going in a direction that can be not only inclusive, but it can be expansive as well. I look forward as well to the questions and the deeper discussion around this.
Thank you so much, Curtis. Great points all around, and I appreciate really flagging the policy element that comes with the infrastructure. A lot of talk about infrastructure right now in Washington, D.C., and a great opportunity to think about how we lay the foundation to be ready for the future of active efficiency. And if that needs to be built on a foundation with broadband access and universal access, it could solve many problems all at the same time. So thank you. Our final panelist is Dr. Pekka Hekarainen. He is the Vice President of Government and Industry Relations at Lutron Electronics. So Pekka, you come from the view of a manufacturer of equipment that can play a really important role in active efficiency. Where do you think policymakers and regulators should focus their energy today? And do you have any recommendations for them as we navigate this transition?
So thank you, Natasha. And it's certainly a pleasure to be on this panel amongst all these fine speakers today. My bias is that I've been in the lighting industry now at Lutron for a little over 30 years. So what I'd like to do is take a sort of a historical perspective and use lighting as in some sense what I believe is a success story in increasing energy efficiency. And so building regulations, energy efficiency regulations started before I joined the lighting industry, and lighting products as appliances have been regulated for about that length of time, I would say. I view, and I think many of us in the industry view our role as being innovators, and we of course manufacture the things that are installed in your buildings. My viewpoint is that the innovations that we have provided, whether that's in the area of lighting controls that have been sort of central to our company, or solid state lighting for the broader industry, the innovations have provided the basis for energy efficiency and have provided also the basis for regulation. We are today a very much a regulated industry. So for about a decade or so now, we as an industry have been talking about a systems approach to energy efficiency, and I think that the active efficiency that we now have through the Alliance, I think that that's the natural next step in this evolution. Enabled by the digital technology and the Internet of Things and all those sorts of areas where, amongst many, our industry is focusing its research efforts. So when you look at our track record from today's perspective, we have greatly decreased the energy use by lighting systems in buildings over the decades. The California shows that in the state of California, the per capita energy consumption has remained pretty flat over the years. Out of that, the lighting portion has decreased a great deal, and other technologies. We all know that we have more consumer devices today than ever before. They have sort of filled in the gap. So taken all of this, I guess my thought on as I'm sort of in the later stages of my career in this industry, my thoughts on energy efficiency regulations are that we should, first and foremost, we should work together, and we should look at ensuring that the regulations do actually save energy. As an industry, we want to be innovators, and we want to be focusing on bringing additional value to the market, not just in terms of energy, but other areas as well. So the real test of energy efficiency to me is in the final application in the buildings. In our case, in the buildings, but there are other players in the market that provide equipment to street and roadway and lighting and that sort of thing. So all of that taken together, it's in the systems, and it's making sure that we eliminate the waste, which to a large extent we have. I'll almost claim victory here, and I'll say that in lighting we have almost done that. There's still little bits and pieces remaining, certainly, what the other thing that is complicating matters that I see happening in the IoT space is that additional functions are being built into the same products, and that is good from a materials efficiency perspective. We don't need additional boxes to house those functions. We can build them inside the same box, but it complicates how we approach regulation, and this is kind of like a new area. So we again, I'll emphasize that I think we need to work together, and this panel is an excellent start. And thank you, Natasha and Alliance, for organizing this effort on active efficiency, because that conversation needs to be continued. And then finally, just as an little industry point that I want to put in here is that when we are regulating appliances as a product, it's important, I think, for all of us to define how we measure and test those products before we set the regulatory standards, so that everybody knows what we are dealing with. We've not always done that during the course of my time in the industry, and that's caused some problems. So I'll stop here and look forward to the Q&A session.
Perfect. Thank you, Pekka. So I think this is a really great demonstration of how all these different pieces flow together. You have the leadership in California articulating, policy and regulatory framework where there is previously none that really creates the space for active efficiency. You see the challenges that come with creating a more coherent system across the country and all of the experimentation that does lead to huge amounts of complexity. You see the fact that active efficiency is not only a benefit to the haves, but actually it can be a very real benefit to consumers, to the grid. But we need to be proactive in how we ensure that we implement it to make sure that we're really reaching everybody and bringing out the greatest benefits that come with this technology. And finally, hearing about from the manufacturer point of view, a lot of this rides on the affordability and the innovation of the technologies that we're assembling into the system, and making sure that we get that right is going to be a really important part of making the whole piece function together as a whole. So this is a great taste of many of the different kinds of challenges and opportunities we have ahead. One of the themes that came up frequently is that in crafting policy and regulations around this space, I love, Tanuj, your framing that the system was not built for this. And in a sense, the way we normally do policymaking is to try to make minor adjustments to the existing framework that we have. It's just the nature of how this is done. We generally work in a sort of incrementalist strategy. But we've also heard that it is also true that just patching up existing programs and doing the things the way we've always done them with minor adjustments can lose a lot of the benefits and a lot of the opportunities, and it's generally just a more costly way to get there. So we have two parallel and challenging truths: that we cannot simply wipe clean the framework that we have and start over. We have, a country with great diversity in the utility system, and a lot of that diversity really is important and really is real. But we also want to make sure that our end goal, thinking a year, but also thinking 10 years, 20 years, do we want to be in a place where we have a more coherent and consistent market across the board for active efficiency and policies that make it possible to really move the benefits forward in an efficient way that also preserves our other priorities: resilience, safety, reliability, et cetera. So, moving to a more integrated view, all of you actually touched on ways that you are doing it in your own positions. In California, taking a more integrated view across all the different tools in the toolkit. Tanuj, at Uplight, thinking about how you really connect the dots for consumers. Curtis, with your programs, taking a step back and thinking about how you really can reach them and what the toolkit is. Do any of you have recommendations for us working together as a community, as the Active Efficiency Collaborative, for how we can make more transformational change and row in the same direction, even if we're not trying to create a silver bullet?
I'm happy to start if I'll stick my neck out here. So I wanted to just commend everybody. I mean, this is an amazing, like you said it well, Natasha. I mean, everybody's doing incredible things. And I think it shows that we're in this incredibly fertile moment of innovation and thought and experimentation and kind of creativity, where we're all kind of, in a way, feeling our way, but we have
Looks like we may have.
Oh,
we lost you just for a second there. You're back.
Am I back? Okay, great. I mean, California is distinct. We're a huge economy, the 5th largest in the world. We have a particular utility structure. And I just wanted to highlight that a little bit of a caveat in different ways, but kind of similar. They have a lot of advantages because they can integrate across, a lot of different sectors. Whereas an investor-owned utility model is a different and in a lot of ways more constrained approach to getting the kind of generational investments that we're talking about here to kind of shift. And so I wanted to just acknowledge that, for example, you're integrated across all these sectors, Curtis. That wouldn't necessarily be possible in all its glory in an investor-owned utility because they have to focus on what they focus on, right? And they have to really keep that kind of straitjacket on. For their shareholders. But I do think that the overall, it is possible to say that, there's this blurring at the grid edge. And so, that traditional model doesn't really work anymore when you're talking about behind the meter. You have a lot of ability to do that, Curtis. You can go to your member consumers and say, hey, we're going to do this, and kind of hammer it out. But I think that that grid edge in an investor and utility kind of context, that enables companies like Uplight to provide services to utilities that can actually harness some of these new resources. But it does mean that this disintegration at the grid edge does create unease, I think, across the traditional regulatory structure. And so the integrated resource plan is kind of a step in that direction where we can move away. You've all brought this up in different ways, but in California and lots of other places, the efficiency programs historically, for the last 20 plus years, have really been a bolt-on. They haven't been part of procurement. They haven't been traditionally part of real, integrated resource planning. And so they've kind of been this add-on, this nice to have, okay, if we can prove that the cost is below X line, then we're going to invest, we're going to do an upcharge, do a public purpose charge, and we're going to create a bucket of money and we're going to invest that. But it really is a parallel, kind of not in the core planning of the utility. That has to change. It is changing, but really only slowly. The aggregated demand level, distribution level, on whichever side of the meter, but certainly behind the meter, those have to be articulated and quantified in a way that a balancing authority can have faith that they are going to be real resources that are dispatchable in some way, they're understandable, that can respond when there's a congestion issue or fires or outages, that sort of thing. They really have to play in that space. And so active efficiency with all the communications and dispatch that allows, the communications and controls and the intelligence that either a utility or third-party ecosystems can provide. That's the path, I think, that all of us need to be playing in. I mean, I do recognize that Pekka, I have to give the lighting industry credit that you exactly what you said. I mean, LEDs are long-lived, efficient, awesome technology, and they have opened up all sorts of possibilities to manage our growth in other sectors. And so that's a huge success story. And so we need to replicate that kind of market transformation in other sectors. That'll be specific to those sectors. But I think all these pieces have to come together, and it's really more of a kind of a community-based solution than it is sort of a top-down solution. It really has to both be bottom-up and top-down, and those things have to meet. So I guess I'll just stop by saying the regulatory structure, kind of where I started, the regulatory structure is really important. In a vertically integrated system, completely different than a restructured system, for example. So the conversations are going to look different depending on where you are in that regulatory structure. But in general, I would say, it's clear that the grid edge is the thing right now.
Nude, you're muted, I believe.
Thanks. I want to push back a little bit on something Commissioner McAllister has asserted that we don't have a solution, or maybe imply we don't have a solution really for the investor and utility and getting them fully aligned. Before my current role at Uplight, I spent 4 years at the Smart Electric Power Alliance thinking through this very specific issue about how the utility business models need to transform to be more DER optimized going forward. And, in that process, we gathered, over 1,000 different experts from across the industry and representing various interests, and had lots of convenings, and took 4 years and solicited, something like 50 different independent white papers as a crowdsourced effort to this. And we wrote this report about the 5 different visions of the future. And then, I got to Uplight and I started advocating, and I got some feedback on those reports. And I realized that, maybe we just create these regulatory assets and create performance-based incentives, and just that's the thing that goes. It looks like what a CFO at a utility is used to doing, getting a return on capital deployed. And if you make it performance-based, we can figure out, how to break out some of the overly prescriptive bolt-on approaches and leave it up to the utilities to innovate. And I know a lot of folks will push back to say, hey, utilities aren't necessarily all that innovative, and they have innovated in certain ways. They haven't innovated a lot in DSM as the utility themselves. Except then you hear stories like what Curtis is talking about with the PAYS model, right? Incredible innovation. And I think if you tie, what I heard from Curtis was, hey, we really care about load factor, a very traditionalist kind of mindset when it comes to how you run your distribution system. And we're going to take Pays, which is a whole new way of engaging consumers and creating a utility solution. You've now just had the old and new meet together in something that's really compelling. And maybe Pays is going to be carbon optimized. I think that was alluded to, or it could be something else in different jurisdictions. Let the jurisdiction figure out what the performance criteria are and give the utilities the incentives for meeting those, and make that more attractive than, or at least as attractive as anything else they could be doing as an ongoing concern. And I think we can start seeing utilities. You got to have patience. We all have to have patience, and with the climate crisis being what it is, we don't have a lot of patience for that. And we've expended a lot of patience waiting for various market actors to transform. But if we can have more patience and drive more incentive-based performance and trust that, hey, we can actually have a better system even if utilities make more money. Like, that's not a bad thing. I encounter that all the time. Is a lot of folks are pushing back. Is like, but the utility will make money that way. It's like, great, everyone should make money, right? Like, we want more wealth creation. But if we can start taking those innovations, like what I heard Curtis talking about, Andrew, what you're trying to set up in California, Becca, what you've delivered in the lighting industry, right? Let's let the market, let's let the industry innovate by going through performance-based compensation, and then just open it up, and let's not be overly prescriptive and trying to discount everything every which way that we can with persistence or other types of factors and calculations that come in that no one really understands and has to figure out over and over again as a real drag on actual performance, what we do care about. I mean, the free ridership thing really bugs me. The application, the TRC, right? Total resource cost, right? All the costs are in there, but only some of the benefits, only the electric system benefits are in there, but all the costs are piled in. I don't know why. I mean, when people buy EVs, they're buying them primarily based on ego, not on economics, right? That's why people are or regulatory compliance. So how do you even price the good feeling that somebody has from buying a Tesla into a cost test analysis on what kind of incentive you're going to give it, right? Well, there's similar things with weatherizing your home, having comfort benefits, feeling like you live in a home that's modern and new. And all those kind of things really are barriers for us. So we got to shift that mindset. But I think there are ways to do it without just throwing the whole system out. And I think Curtis's example at Roanoke is a great one, using that incremental step of new innovation with an important reliability perspective and a cost effectiveness perspective with load factor.
Thanks, Tanuj. And Natasha, before you move on, I'll just one or two things I'll add to what has already been said by the Commissioner as well as Tanuj. One is, we've got so much data today, more data than we've ever had. So the question we have to ask ourselves, maybe twofold here, are we understanding and being proactive and demonstrating what is that true value and in efficiency? If we're driving towards ROI, and as we've done with our energy efficiency program, we've done measurement verification after the fact, and there's a positive return there. So are we looking at it from a data-driven perspective, number one? And then are we factoring in the component of disruption? And we know that inefficient businesses or industries, we've got the proof to show us that inefficiency has prompted disruption. And as we not deal with things behind the meter, we have to understand that if we don't do it, someone else is going to. And that's gonna be, and who's in the better position to do it, the incumbent or the newcomer? We have to ask ourselves those questions as we deal with this subject. And to the point of policy and incentives, it needs to be data driven. I just want to leave that point and drive that one a little bit further.
Thank you.
And Natasha, I would just like to add a little thought here and highlight the importance of the role of the Alliance in keeping these conversations going. Because, why do we build anything? Why do we build buildings or any other structures and things like that? It's because of people. And we need to serve the health and safety needs of people first and foremost. Energy is important, certainly, but for many of us, health and safety come first, and that's particularly relevant now that we're dealing with this COVID-19 pandemic and the possible implications that that has on our building design. In addition to that, in our industry, in the lighting industry, there are emerging research results pointing to the links between human health and lighting. So to get all of our collective arms around these issues that are complicating things for all of us, it's incumbent on the Alliance and other venues like this, but we are here with the Alliance, so I'll highlight your role, Natasha, that we need to keep this conversation going regularly so that we can wrestle this around.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. And obviously, this is a very deep discussion where there's value in having this conversation. I feel like it's a bit like a fractal, where the closer you get, the more you see a similar picture emerge, even at the micro levels as you go. So one thing that I'm hearing is that I would sort of bin some of what we're talking about into different categories. There's the fact that this is a nascent opportunity. There's a lot of stuff that isn't clear. What do we do with all this data? There's a great one. How do we manage the rules at the grid edge? How do we even regulate pieces of this where it's very much a new space? Who are the main players? What are their roles? What are the roles of the existing player and the incumbents, and how should that change and adjust and alter? And then there's some no regrets actions. There's creating the foundation for active efficiency, broadband development, AMI. And increasingly, we're seeing that both AMI and broadband are going to be necessary together. I think in some circles, I've heard the claims that, if you have AMI, then broadband's sort of secondary, but I'm also hearing increasingly that no, it's actually potentially going the opposite way altogether, that really we need both pieces of that in full form. And that's on top of the completely non-energy related aspect of broadband being a major determinant in a person's ability to get a job, to communicate with family, to live a life in our more digitalized world without that digital divide that you flagged, Curtis. There's also, no regrets action in terms of developing, a greater understanding of the value of smart devices. That's going to be part of the backbone of what really builds out these opportunities. So understanding their benefits and creating a framework that really incentivizes them to get out to market is a great thing. Then there's sort of, I think, in a way, the trickier part, which is where are there policies and regulations that need to be adapted, adjusted, or potentially changed at a deeper level in order to really enable the system to go forward. And I will just make a note that, through the Active Efficiency Collaborative, the Alliance is organizing a policy discussion in which we're trying to articulate many of those specific elements. Where really are there severe barriers that need to be discussed? Where are there bigger ideas that can get us across the line? And where are there minor adjustments that can make a difference? And Tanuj, I really appreciated your point that changing the philosophy a little bit and thinking more in terms of a performance basis is one opportunity to create a sort of envelope in which you can fit it into the existing sort of regulatory framework, but you can have more innovation and more optimization within that system. So these kinds of ideas, sometimes it will require just a different approach, and sometimes it will require adapting to the approach that we have. And ideally, we'll find an optimized way through all of that. One point that came up in different ways across your talks, and just flagging for those listening out on the line, if you do have a question, we have time to take one or two. But in the meantime, I'll just ask, we've heard that there's a real challenge in valuing active efficiency. And this goes from the very, very back to my fractal analogy. This goes from the very technical, what is the actual, dollar and cent value of active efficiency as it's being, demand side management programs or demand response programs being bid into CAL-ISO, all the way over to why should we be doing it? And are we doing it for health reasons? Are we doing it for equity reasons? Are we doing it for grid reasons? All of a sudden, we have all of these different value streams that are not fitting neatly into the way we normally value a demand side management program. And again, this is something that I think all of you have touched on in some form or another. So if you could wave a magic wand and change something in how we are valuing active efficiency, how do you think we could do a better job of really understanding where its value is? Are there specific policies, regulatory frames you would change, or is it more about changing hearts and minds?
Go ahead, Curtis. Go, please.
I think we could let's take the policy and the regulatory piece out and just look at it from a purely business perspective. And I want to take us outside of that to go to the what I would call the consumer component of it, particularly the big box consumers who have placed sustainability as a huge priority in terms of how they operate. And they're doing it obviously for financial reasons and probably in many cases for pure reasons also that are outside of the financial realm. So is it good business, I guess, is the question I would ask, and whether it makes financial sense to do it would be the true measurement at the end of the day. I'll get it started with that as a teaser.
Thank you.
Curtis, you made a really good point earlier in your comments. I think we all agree with this, but or maybe it was Packet. We have at Cowboy Buildings, we have an energy system to serve customers. And we have this collective system that we invest in together because that's more cost effective, and we have the system for that purpose. And we got to remember that it's like what customers want is what we really need. And so thinking about leaning in there. So I love prices to devices, but prices to devices are insufficient. We have to make the prices to devices actually resonate with customers. We got to give customers the empowerment to actually choose those devices and deploy those devices and actually respond. I got an interesting debate with Ahmad Faruqi. It's kind of weird to be someone you've learned from and has been a mentor, and then telling him in a panel that he's wrong about something because he was talking about the stuff I'm talking about with consumer engagement as being potentially paternalistic. And I really challenged him on that. I was like, we can do time of use. The biggest barrier to time of use rate rollout and actually deploying prices to devices is concerns about consumer acceptance. So we should invest in consumer acceptance. And so when I think about valuation, the big thing that I would do is to try to say, hey, let's get smarter about the consumer experience as part of the value proposition. Let's get smarter about making investments. If it's LMI, it's LMI participation. If it's regular Resi, it's Resi consumers feeling engaged and empowered across all types. If it's C&I, really leaning in on making sure there's no gap between economic and achievable potential. If I was going to say, hey, you want to incentivize utilities, give them bonus ROE for how much they close the gap between achievable and economic potential, because that tells you that they are going and figuring out what the customer actually wants to deploy that we've judged to be economic. There's lots of reforms to make there as well. There's lots of ways to improve the mechanism of how we calculate the value, and I'm all for all that, and we invest a lot in that. But that fundamental gap that we tend to accept a discount of 50% of the economic potential to what's achievable, I think is right there. That's where we should put incentives to try to close that gap, and then we can get a ton of value for everybody.
And Andrew, if you could do 30 seconds.
Yeah, very, 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 very quickly. I know we have to end up, but I think there are three pieces of this. It's not only about rates, but absolutely it's partly about rates. But we need to liberalize data, make it easier to access data, AMI, data access, with protections, right? And then we need rates that really reflect the grid value. And then we need to enable third parties, like Tanuj, like others, to do this virtual power plant, to really put it all together to create value at grid scale and aggregate. Without each of those things, with rates that actually reflect the value, the needs of the grid, and anything broader that we think public policy dictates, then it's not going to align. And so we need to do all three of those things to really make it work at some scale.
Perfect. And I think that's actually a great place to end. I know that Curtis had to drop off a minute ago. Just want to thank our panelists for tuning in. Great conversation, really important conversation. We look forward to continuing and digging deep into how we can really serve customers and make active efficiency work for all, for the grid, for decarbonization, for health, for energy, for savings, for a better life across the board. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Natasha. Really good job. Thanks.